So in this section, we're going to be talking about evidences of evolution. And there's just so much to this, so we're going to hit it pretty fast and pretty hard. So there's a lot of things that support evolution as far as like an evidence of it. And one of the things is the fossil record. I think that this is listed first. In my opinion, this is kind of the weakest evidence for evolution. So the fossil record shows that some species have remained very similar to their ancestors, but some have changed. The reason I call it very weak is the fossil record is extremely incomplete, but it does give us cool snapshots along the way of what used to be here. And so in that way, it's really cool and helpful to look at. So, in looking at evolutionary relationships, scientists have found a lot of transitional fossils. Those are things that kind of tie two things together, but we don't know for sure if they were related. So there's different types of evidence that we are going to talk about in this section. And one is morphological evidence, which is like body shapes differences, and the other is biochemical evidence, meaning deeper at like the cellular level evidence. So the morphological evidence is really about the anatomy and structures of the organism, while biological evidence deals more with the chemistry of the species. So derived traits are those that we think came from something else. So in this, there's Archaeopteryx there, and it had feathers. It was the dinosaur with feathers. The feathers are thought to have come from scales, but we really don't know. Then there's ancestral traits that you see more in the ancestors behind it. So the examples from your book are like teeth or tails, that they were there in the fossil record all along the way. So we have a better idea of where these came from. So homologous structures, when you're comparing anatomy, homologous structures are structures that are basically just modifications of the same thing. So just taking the same thing, like I'm rebuilding an old Mustang right now, and as part of that rebuild, like I've seen all these different modifications that all these different people have done on old Mustangs, and you can take the same thing and rebuild it a ton of different ways. So this is like in this forelimbs picture here of different mammals. These are the same bones going all around, but some are more compact and wide, and some are skinny that are meant for flying. Some have been really elongated. And so basically, if two animals share the same types of structures, for example, the same bone structure, then they're probably related. So vestigial structures are a different type of structure. A vestigial structure is one that has either been very reduced in the adult form or is no longer used at all. So examples in humans of vestigial structures that we have is that humans have a tail. Like in a tailbone, we have something called a coccyx, and that tailbone really serves no function in the adult form. In fact, you fall and break it. Very often people break their tailbone. And we have a small tailbone when we are like tiny little babies inside of our mom. And also while we're tiny little babies inside of our mom, we have gills, but they don't come out when you're adults. Then in our adult form, we have an appendix, and that's often just ends up getting infected. It doesn't have like much function in adults. So these are all examples from adult humans. But if you were to look at other animals like whales or snakes, some of them actually have hip bones. And what are they there for? It's probably just a vestigial structure, something that is left over from a primitive form. Sometimes you have analogous structures. These are structures that serve the same purpose but are not related at all. So you might see like a bat and a butterfly. They can both fly, but they're not at all related. Or you might see like a shark fin and a fish fins, or a dolphin fin, or penguins, how they use their wings as fins. So in a penguin, a dolphin with its pectoral fins and you have a shark with its pectoral fins, they're all meant for swimming, but one's a fish, one's a mammal, and one's a bird. So they're not related, although they're sharing the same purpose. So some homologous structures are inherited from a common ancestor, but analogous structures have the same function, but they're not related. Okay, so then another way, evidence of evolution is comparative embryology, how many different things in their embryo form, and you can look this up, it's actually pretty interesting, look very similar. So another type of evidence for evolution is on the molecular level. So in molecular or biochemical level, either one. So molecular in biology, this includes the study of our DNA, RNA, proteins, and it shows many commonalities. And that those commonalities tend to show relatedness. So here's a little chart here. In this chart, it's just looking at cytochrome C and how similar we are and different to other organisms. So the bigger the line, the more different something is from us. So here's humans. Humans would be, 0, so we would have no difference from other humans. But monkeys only have like a 2 to 3 cytochrome differences. They're also a mammal. Go up to a pig. And they're a primate, and you go up to a pig, which is still a mammal, they have less than 10 cytochrome C differences. But then you go up to a bird, and that has 10 or just over 10, and then reptiles and all the way up the line. And as you get further, more, like increasing the difference between humans and that organism, the more differences will be present. So another evidence of evolution is biogeography. And biogeography is where things are and why they are suited for that environment. So biogeography is the study of climate and geology and how that explains the evolution of the plants or the animals that are there. If you are studying why a certain animal lived in one area or not another, you would be using biogeography. Another example that we're going to talk about is, well, I think you need to know this word, fitness. Fitness is the contribution, the relative contribution of a trait and how much it'll help the next generation survive. Okay. So here, types of adaptations. Camouflage is a type of adaptation. This spider is hidden really well on this flower, and I think you guys understand camouflage. And mimicry, that's when a non-poisonous or organism will look like a poisonous one. And I'm saying poisonous, but that's a horrible word. And in fact, your book says that, and it in the caption, and it shouldn't. It should say venomous because venom is injected. Poison you like drink or eat, but venom is injected into you, and that's how this would go into you. So I'm kind of embarrassed that your book says that, and then I just said it out loud because I just read it off the book. I shouldn't have said that. It is venomous. And so both of these, this snake that's a king snake is basically getting some protection by looking like a venomous coral snake. Predators will leave these alone. And if you look at something like the monarch and the viceroy butterfly, the monarch is actually poisonous, not venomous, but if you ate it, it would be poisonous and it would just make you a little sick. But a viceroy is not. And there's a lot of predators that will eat a monarch and then will never touch a viceroy because they're like, ew, yuck, that made me feel really sick. I'll never eat one of those again. And they'll teach their young that. Another mistake from your book is that this helps both species or something, it says, but it doesn't. It actually hurts the monarchs because if an animal goes and eats a bunch of viceroys, then it can figure that it'll eat monarchs too. So the monarchs are hurt by this. The animal that did the work gets hurt. So an antimicrobial resistance is really important because we have created super bacteria over time. So before, antibiotics used to be really readily prescribed, and a lot of people would start to feel better. They'd stop taking the antibiotics, but then the leftover bacteria were the ones that couldn't be easily killed by antibiotics, so they would survive and reproduce. We ended up creating a bunch of super bacteria that have been really hard to kill now. And so doctors are slower to prescribe antibiotics unless you really need it. And if you ever are prescribed and decide to take it, then just make sure you finish the whole bottle so you don't make a super bacteria. And I believe the last thing that we're going to talk about is spandrels. This is a test question, but basically with spandrels, that was this idea that sometimes, like if you were to make a rectangular room but make rounded circle arches in it, then there's going to be these open spaces that are pretty in the design, but they really are just like a byproduct of what was built. So, how does this matter for evolution? Well, some things in evolution, we look at things and go, well, why does this flower have this adaptation? Or why does this animal have this adaptation? Sometimes it's just there. Sometimes it wasn't really purpose driven. It's just a consequence of the way the genes fell. So the example the book gives you, which is a good one from humans, is that humans evolved to stand upright and have very tiny pelvises, and yet we have very large brains and are highly intelligent. Well, take a female with a very large brain child coming through some very small pelvic bones, and we deliver our babies very young and pretty helpless, especially compared to other like primates. Like other monkeys have a much smaller brained child and their pelvis is a lot larger. So when their babies come out, geez, their baby can crawl up them in a few days, and their baby can, kind of take care of itself and crawl around really well, where our babies are very helpless for a very long time. Um, but it's the large brains that we think maybe just because we had such large brains, this baby had to be delivered early. And so having helpless babies was not necessarily like mandatory or something. It's just a result of what made sense with our bodies. So that's it for this section. Good luck. And there was a lot there. Take care. Bye bye.